The laughter started before the vote even finished. Admiral Elena Cho stood alone at the center of the Kesh-Vorn Imperial Assembly, a vast amphitheater carved from black stone and lit by floating orbs of cold blue light. Above her, seated in tiers that stretched higher than any human cathedral, sat the delegates of 41 empires, scaled, chitinous, some little more than shimmering gas held together by will and technology, all of them looking down at her the way a person looks down at an insect that has wandered somewhere it doesn't belong. 20 ships, said the Vorn High Speaker, his voice amplified until it rattled the floor beneath her boots. 20 ships, and you call yourselves a fleet worth negotiating with. Scattered laughter rippled through the tiers. Somewhere above, a Kathrani delegate made a sound like tearing paper, their species equivalent of a chuckle. Elena did not flinch. She had trained for 11 years not to flinch. The Sol Accord, the High Speaker continued, holding up a data slate that glowed with human designs, Earth's most advanced warships, their weapon systems, their shield harmonics, all of it laid bare for the assembly to see. You will disarm 90% of this. Fleet. You will submit your remaining vessels to Imperial inspection. In return, humanity will be permitted trade access to the outer lanes. He smiled, an expression that didn't belong on his angular face. A generous offer for a species that arrived to the stars only decades ago. Elena's eyes moved once across the tiers. 41 empires, thousands of warships between them. And Earth, newly unified after its own century of wars, with a battered fleet of 20 ships that hadn't been built to win wars. They'd been built to survive one that had already happened once, 3 years ago in the dark beyond Neptune, when something out there had tried to erase a human colony fleet without so much as a declaration of intent. Do you accept the terms, Admiral? The High Speaker asked, already certain of the answer. Humanity accepts, Elena said. The word landed flat in the chamber. A few delegates looked almost disappointed. They had wanted more resistance, more spectacle. The Vorn ambassador seated nearest the floor, a sharp-eyed woman named Nyla Threx, watched Elena's face carefully and frowned. Something about the Admiral's calm didn't sit right. It wasn't the calm of surrender. It was the calm of someone reading from a script whose ending only she knew. Elena signed the treaty with a stylus that trembled, not from fear, but from something closer to grief, though no one in that chamber would have recognized it as such. Then she turned, walked out of the amphitheater alone, boarded her shuttle, and did not speak a single word until the airlock sealed behind her. Only then did she pull a small device from her sleeve, nothing more than a plain metal cylinder, and speak 2 words into it. Begin ashfall. The device pulsed once and the message was gone, threaded through channels no Imperial sensor had ever mapped, racing outward toward 100 different points in space that humanity had spent 2 quiet years preparing. 400 light-years away, at Outpost Kesh-Dren 7, a relay station monitoring the edge of human territory, a young technician named Alan Vask was halfway through his shift when his console blinked out. He frowned and tapped it. Nothing. He tried the backup terminal. Nothing. Not an error message, not static. Just a clean, total absence, as if the station's entire communications array had simply forgotten it existed. Command, this is Kesh-Dren 7, he said into his headset. We're showing a full comms blackout. Repeat, full blackout. Silence answered him. Not the crackle of a dead channel. Silence with texture to it, the kind that made the hair on his arms rise. He looked up at the viewport. Space outside looked exactly as it always did, stars fixed and distant, the pale curve of a gas giant far below. Nothing had changed. And yet something had. He never got the chance to report what he saw next, because at that exact moment, 3 systems over, a Vorn scout vessel called the Threnodi's Wake was making its own routine sweep along the human buffer zone, its captain bored, half listening to a report on trade tariffs when his sensor officer sat bolt upright. Captain, I'm reading. I don't know what I'm reading. Explain. 15 contacts. No, 20. They're not on any registered flight path. They weren't there 30 seconds ago. The sensor officer's voice climbed half an octave. Captain, they're between us and the relay station. They're between us and everything. The captain leaned over the display himself, and for the first time in his career felt something cold settle into his stomach. The contacts didn't move like ships. They didn't move like anything he'd trained against. They simply were, arranged with a precision that felt less like a fleet formation and more like a closing hand. "Get us a channel to Keshdren 7, he ordered, now. "Trying, sir. I'm not getting anything. The relay's not responding. Nothing's responding. I think," the sensor officer's voice cracked, "I think we're the only ones who can still see them." The captain opened a priority channel to Imperial Command, his hand shaking slightly as he keyed it in. He had time to say 4 words. "This is Threnodi's wake, reporting unknown." The transmission ended mid-sentence. Not with an explosion, not with a scream or static, or the telltale burst of a weapons discharge that Imperial sensors would have recorded and flagged and sent racing back to headquarters with all the appropriate alarms. It simply stopped. One moment, the Threnodi's wake was a bright, confirmed signal on 12 different tracking arrays across 3 systems. The next moment, it was nothing at all. No wreckage, no distress beacon, no debris field cooling in the vacuum. Just an empty coordinate where a ship used to be, and a half-finished sentence sitting in an Imperial listening post's log, waiting for someone important enough to notice. It would take another 6 hours before anyone did. By the time General Tarek Osun stormed into the war chamber, 6 outposts had gone dark. Not destroyed, not attacked as far as anyone could tell. Simply erased from every sensor net that had once tracked them, as cleanly as a word wiped from a slate. The map on the central table showed 6 blinking red zones scattered along the human buffer, each one a hole in the galaxy, where a listening post, a scout ship, or a border garrison used to be. "This is an act of war," Osun said, slamming a clawed hand onto the table hard enough to crack the display's outer casing. "The humans signed a treaty 2 days ago and they are already testing us. I want a war fleet at the Sol border within the week." "You want to send 400 warships against a species that just voluntarily disarmed 90% of its own navy," said Nyla Threx, arms folded, standing at the far end of the chamber. She was younger than most of the council, sharper-tongued than all of them, and the only person in the room who hadn't raised her voice yet. "Does that strike anyone else as strange? A species prepares to hand over its fleet, and in the same breath starts erasing our outposts? Either humanity is suicidal or humanity isn't responsible at all." "Then who is?" Osun snapped. "I don't know," Threx admitted. "That's why I'm going to find out before we start a war we can't take back." The council argued for another hour before they agreed to her proposal. A diplomatic mission escorted by a modest military presence to investigate the buffer zone directly rather than react blindly. Osun objected loudly and lost, though not before promising, with a look aimed squarely at Threx, that if her mission failed, his fleet would be ready to finish what diplomacy couldn't. 90 million kilometers away, aboard the human flagship Meridian's Edge, Captain Marcus Webb watched his crew work through a routine patrol drill with an ease that would have unsettled any outside observer. There was no shouting, no tension in the voices calling out coordinates. His weapons officer hummed quietly under her breath while she ran calibration checks that, to an untrained eye, looked identical to 100 drills before it. But Webb knew what she was actually calibrating, and it wasn't weapons. "Choir sync at 98%, she reported. 99. There it is. Full lattice engaged." "Good," Webb said, and nothing more. He'd learned, over 2 years of quiet preparation, that the less said about the choir, even among his own crew, the better. Words had a way of becoming leaks, and leaks had a way of becoming wars fought too early. His comms officer, a young lieutenant named Priya Sethi, glanced up from her console. "Sir, we've got a contact entering the buffer zone. Vorn signature. Diplomatic transponder, but she's got teeth. 2 escort cruisers riding with her." "Let her through," Webb said. "Track everything. Engage nothing." "Copy that." Sethi hesitated. "Sir, can I ask, are we actually going to let them see what's out here?" Webb allowed himself a small, tired smile. They're already going to see it, Lieutenant. The only question is whether they understand what they're looking at before it's too late to matter. Nyla Threx stood on the bridge of her own vessel, the solemn Accord, watching the human buffer zone unfold on the main viewport, with the wary attention of someone walking into a room she'd been warned not to enter. Nothing looked wrong. That was what unsettled her most. No fleets massed for battle, no weapons platforms bristling along the border. Just empty space, a scattering of distant stars, and the quiet hum of her own engines. "Ambassador," her sensor officer called, voice tight. "I'm picking up something strange. Quantum resonance echoes. Dozens of them, maybe more, layered across multiple frequencies. They don't match any known propulsion signature." "Define strange," Threx said, crossing to the display. "They're not moving like ships. They're not behaving like sensors either. It's almost like—" The officer trailed off, frowning at his own readout. "It's almost like something is listening back." Threx felt a chill she didn't bother hiding. "Get me a tight beam transmission to the Council, now. I want this logged before we go any further." "Transmitting." A pause. Then the officer's frown deepened. "Ambassador, the outbound array isn't responding." "Switch to backup." "Backup's not responding either. Nothing's broken, ma'am. The diagnostics all read green, it's just not transmitting. It's like the signal is leaving the ship and then simply not arriving anywhere." Threx felt the same cold settle into her stomach that had gripped the doomed captain of the Thrinodes wake hours before her, though she had no way of knowing that. She only knew with the sudden absolute certainty of a predator sensing a trap closing around it, that she had made a terrible mistake in coming here herself. "Helm, reverse course. Get us back across the border, full burn now." "Ambassador, I'm trying. The navigation array isn't responding to helm control. We're still moving forward." "I don't understand. The engines are answering fine. It's just—" The pilot's voice rose, cracking with the first real note of panic. "It's like something else is flying the ship." Outside the viewport, the stars did not shift. The solemn Accord continued gliding forward on a course none of its crew had set, deeper into human space, toward whatever those quantum echoes had been listening for. The bridge lights flickered once. Then every screen on the ship, all at once, went black. 2 years earlier, in a bunker buried 3 kilometers beneath the ruins of what used to be a colony called New Providence, Dr. Priya Anand stood in front of a wall of screens and told her team something that sounded, at the time, like madness. "We're not going to build a bigger fleet," she said. "We're going to build a quieter one." The room had gone still. Behind her, the screen still played the last transmission from the New Providence Defense Fleet. 12 ships. Gone in under 6 minutes, wiped out by an enemy that had appeared without warning and vanished the same way, leaving no wreckage anyone could study, no weapon signature anyone could trace. Just 11,000 dead, and a silence that had never been fully explained. "They found us because we were loud," Anand continued. "Every signal we send, every sensor sweep, every ship broadcasting its position to coordinate with the fleet, all of it is a light in the dark, screaming, 'Here we are.' So we stop screaming. We build something that doesn't need to shout to work together. Something that shares everything instantly without ever touching a channel an outsider can intercept." She turned to face them fully. "I'm calling it the choir. Because when it's finished, every ship, every station, every soldier in this program will sing from the same sheet in a language no one else can hear." It took 2 years, a budget no elected official was ever allowed to see in full, and the quiet recruitment of engineers, soldiers, and volunteers who understood they might never be thanked publicly for what they built. Anand's final log entry, recorded the night before the Sol Accord was signed, was found much later by people who finally understood what it meant. "They think our silence means we're beaten. They think a treaty on paper is the same as surrender. Let them believe that a little longer. Silence isn't weakness. Silence is the weapon. And it's finally ready." Nyla Threx woke to darkness and for one disoriented moment, thought she had died. Then feeling returned to her limbs, heavy, sluggish, but present, and she realized she was lying on something soft, in a room with dim, amber lighting, restrained not by chains or binders but by some kind of shimmering field that hummed faintly a few centimeters above her skin whenever she tried to move. "Easy," said a voice, calm and unhurried, from somewhere near the door. "Human. Male. You've been out about 6 hours. The field will lift once your vitals settle. It's not meant to hurt you, just keep you from hurting yourself while you're disoriented." "Where is my ship?" Threx said, her voice rougher than she intended. "My crew. Alive. All of them. Nobody was harmed, Ambassador. You have my word on that." A pause. "For what it's worth, I know that's not worth much to you right now." Threx forced herself to sit up despite the restraining field's gentle resistance, glaring toward the voice's source. A man stood there in a simple gray uniform, hands loosely clasped, watching her with an expression that unsettled her more than hostility would have. It looked almost like sympathy. "You're going to want to see this," he said. The restraining field released with a soft chime, and a section of the wall behind him dissolved into a view screen. Threx rose unsteadily, crossed the room despite every instinct telling her to stay put, and looked out. For a long moment she couldn't process what she was seeing. Earth hung below, blue and achingly ordinary, wrapped in the familiar white swirl of its clouds, but surrounding it, not in orbit exactly, but layered through the space around the planet in patterns too precise to be natural, too vast to be a handful of ships, was something else entirely. Thousands of small, silent shapes, barely larger than shuttles, arranged in a lattice that pulsed faintly with light, connected by threads of energy too fine to be weapons fire, too organized to be anything but deliberate. It wasn't a fleet. It didn't look like any fleet she had ever studied. It looked like a nervous system. "What am I looking at?" she said quietly. "Something Earth built after we almost lost everything," the man said. "My name is Captain Marcus Webb. I'm sorry for the way you found out about it. I really am. But you weren't going to believe a briefing. You needed to see it. Those outposts, the scout ship, my own comms array failing for no reason anyone could explain." Threx's mind raced, pulling the pieces together even as fresh horror bloomed with each connection. That thing out there. It's not attacking ships. It's isolating them. Webb's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A flicker of weariness of a burden carried a long time. "We didn't build it to conquer anyone, Ambassador. We built it because 3 years ago, something erased an entire colony fleet of ours and vanished before we could even understand what hit us. 11,000 people died in 6 minutes, and nobody in this galaxy so much as sent condolences. Every empire in that assembly looked at us afterward and saw an opportunity, not a tragedy. So we stopped being loud enough to be a target, and we started being quiet enough to be a problem." Threx stared at the lattice of light surrounding Earth, her mind already racing ahead to a much darker realization, one that made her blood run cold. "General Austin," she said, "he's sending a war fleet. 400 ships. If your people let him get anywhere near this—" Webb's jaw tightened, and for the first time real urgency entered his voice. "How long ago did he launch?" 6 hours, Threx said. "Maybe 7 by now." Webb turned sharply toward the door, already keying his comm. "Get me Admiral Cho, now. Tell her the ambassador's awake, and tell her we have a bigger problem than we thought." Behind him, on the view screen, one section of the shimmering lattice around Earth pulsed brighter than the rest. A silent, coordinated ripple spreading outward through thousands of linked points at once, like a single organism drawing a breath before it moved. Threx watched it happen and understood, with sudden and complete clarity, that whatever was coming for General Austin's fleet was already awake, and already listening, and it had been waiting far longer than anyone in the assembly had ever imagined. General Tarek Austin stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Iron Verdict, and watched 400 warships fall into formation behind him, like a wall of teeth closing around the throat of human space. It was, without exaggeration, the largest single fleet the Keshvorn Empire had assembled in a generation. Dreadnoughts stretched across the display in neat, disciplined rows, their hulls bristling with weapons arrays that had subdued a dozen lesser species without needing to fire more than a warning volley. Asen had waited years for a chance like this. A justified war, a clear enemy, and a target too small to fight back and too proud to run. Ambassador Threx has gone silent, his second-in-command reported. Along with her entire escort. No wreckage, no distress signal, same pattern as the outposts. Then she's already confirmed what I've suspected since the beginning, Asen said. The humans are testing us, hoping we blink first. We will not blink. He turned to face the bridge crew, voice carrying the easy confidence of a man who had never lost a war he'd chosen to start. Set course for Sol, full fleet advance. Let them see exactly what their little tricks have earned them. The iron verdict surged forward, and 399 warships followed, cutting a path toward a species they were certain could not possibly stop them. Aboard a quiet, unmarked station orbiting far above Earth, a place that did not appear on any official registry, human or otherwise, Nyla Threx sat across a table from Admiral Elena Cho and Dr. Priya Anand and felt, for the first time in her long career, genuinely out of her depth. You let me live, Threx said. You let my crew live. You could have erased us the way you erased everything else. Why? Because erasing people was never the point, Anand said. She looked older than Threx expected, tired in a way that went beyond sleep. The choir isn't a weapon that kills, Ambassador. It's a weapon that isolates. It cuts a ship off from its fleet, from its command structure, from its ability to coordinate or call for help. A blind, deaf vessel in the dark is not a threat. It's just alone. We learned a long time ago that alone is enough. Enough for what? Enough to make an enemy stop, Cho said quietly. Not enough to make them disappear. We don't kill unless we're given no other choice. We isolate. We wait. Most of the time, that's all it takes for an enemy to understand they've already lost, without a single life needing to end to prove it. Threx absorbed this in silence, her mind working through the implications with the same sharp precision that had made her one of the youngest ambassadors in Vorn history. Then General Asen's fleet is about to fly straight into the same trap that took your ship, Cho finished grimly. Except Asen isn't. He's not going to sit quietly and wait for an explanation. He's going to panic, and a panicking commander with 400 warships and no way to coordinate them is a much more dangerous thing than a disciplined one. Then stop it, Threx said. Warn him. Let me warn him. I can reach the council. I can explain what's happening before. We tried, Anand said softly. 2 hours ago. Every channel we opened toward his fleet, every attempt to send a warning ahead of the choir's activation, all of it failed. Not because we were blocked. Because the choir doesn't distinguish between a threat and a warning once it's fully engaged across that many contacts at once. It isolates everything in the field, including us right now, trying to reach him. Threx felt something cold settle low in her chest. Then reach me. Let me send it through my own systems, my own frequency. The council will trust a Vorn signal faster than a human one anyway. Cho and Anand exchanged a long look. It's already too late for a warning to matter, Cho said finally, quiet but not unkind. The lattice engaged 11 minutes ago. Asen's fleet crossed the outer edge of the buffer 4 minutes after that. She turned the main display toward Threx, and for a moment no one in the room spoke. On the screen, 400 bright contacts, Asen's proud, magnificent war fleet, glided steadily toward Sol in perfect formation, utterly unaware that the space around them had already begun, quietly and invisibly, to close. Threx opened her mouth to argue, to insist there had to be something, some channel, some window still open. And then she saw it happen in real time on the display. One by one, at the very edges of the fleet formation first, then spreading inward with terrible, patient speed, individual contacts began to flicker. Not vanish, flicker. Their telemetry dropping out. Their formation lines fading from the display as if the ships themselves had simply stopped existing as part of a coordinated whole. Ambassador, Cho said, her voice heavy with something that sounded almost like regret. I need you to understand something because you're the only person from your empire who's going to see this from the inside instead of the outside. We are not doing this because we want a war. We're doing this because 2 years ago we asked for mercy from an assembly that laughed at us instead, and we learned that mercy has to be built before it can ever be given. She met Threx's eyes steadily. Watch what happens next. And remember it exactly the way it happens, because in a few hours you're the only voice from your empire who's going to be able to tell them the truth. On the screen, the last coordinated formation lines of Asen's fleet dissolved into 400 isolated silent points of light, scattered and blind in the dark, each one now utterly alone. And then, from the very center of that scattered fleet, a single new signal flared to life. General Tarek Asen's flagship, broadcasting on every open frequency at once, his voice raw with fury and the first unmistakable trace of fear. This is General Asen of the Iron Verdict. To any Imperial vessel receiving this signal, we are under attack. Formation is broken. I say again, formation is broken. The transmission cut off, not with static, but with the same eerie total silence that had swallowed every warning before it. Threx stared at the display, and for the first time since stepping into the assembly chamber 2 days ago to laugh alongside 40 other empires, she understood with sickening clarity exactly what humanity had built, and exactly how badly they had all underestimated it. General Asen's voice was the last coherent thing his bridge crew heard from the rest of the fleet, and within 30 seconds it was clear that no one was coming to answer him. "Status," he barked, gripping the edge of the command console so hard his claws scraped against the metal. "Someone give me a status." "Formation telemetry is gone, sir." His sensor officer's voice had climbed into a register Asen had never heard from her before. "Not damaged. Gone. I can't raise the Dread Chorus, I can't raise the Vengeance's claim, I can't raise anyone. It's like the rest of the fleet just isn't there anymore, but our own sensors say they are. Right where they're supposed to be, just. Not answering." Outside the viewport, nothing appeared to have changed. No explosions lit the dark. No enemy ships closed in with guns blazing. That, more than anything, was what made the silence unbearable, the sense of an unseen hand reaching into the fleet and simply switching something off, ship by ship, without ever announcing itself. 300 kilometers away aboard the war cruiser Dread Chorus, Captain Ilyan Voss discovered the same terrifying truth from the other direction. His own sensors, his own weapons, his own engines, all responded perfectly to command. It was everyone else who had vanished. No formation data, no fleet-wide channel, no way to confirm whether the ship beside him even still existed. "Sir," his weapons officer said quietly. "Orders?" Voss stared at the empty dark outside his viewport. At a battle he could feel happening around him but couldn't see, couldn't coordinate, couldn't even confirm. "Hold position," he said finally, because it was the only order that made any sense left to give. "We hold, and we wait for someone to tell us what in the void is happening." No one ever did. Aboard the Meridian's edge, Captain Marcus Webb watched the tactical display with the focused, unhurried calm of a man executing a plan he'd rehearsed 100 times before, though nothing about what he felt inside matched that calm. "Fleet is fully isolated," Lieutenant Sethi reported. 400 contacts, all confirmed alone. No coordinated resistance possible. Choir lattice holding steady across the entire field. "Good," Webb said quietly. "Nobody fires unless fired upon. We are not here to slaughter 400 confused, frightened crews who don't understand what's happening to them. We're here to end this before it becomes something none of us can walk back from." Beside him, at the weapons station, his younger brother Daniel Webb kept his eyes fixed on his console. Jaw tight, hands steady, despite everything churning beneath the surface. Daniel had joined the choir program 18 months after losing his wife and daughter in the New Providence attack. Not out of hatred, Marcus knew, but out of a desperate need to make sure no one else's family disappeared into an unexplained silence the way his had. "Contact designation Iron Verdict is broadcasting again," Sethi said. "Same channel as before. It's General Asen." "Let it through," Marcus said. "Everyone should hear this." Austin's voice filled the bridge, no longer commanding, no longer certain. Raw now, stripped of the arrogance that had carried him into human space with 400 ships at his back. This is General Tarek Austin. To whoever is doing this, show yourselves. Face me directly, ship to ship. If you have the courage the rest of your species apparently lacks. Marcus exchanged a glance with his tactical officer, then keyed his own channel open. The first time in the entire operation that a human voice would answer an Imperial one directly. General Austin, this is Captain Marcus Webb, Terran Fleet. Stand down your remaining weapons and power down your engines. No one aboard your ships needs to die today. We're not here for a slaughter. You erased my fleet, Austin snarled. You call that mercy? Your fleet is alive, General. Every ship, every crew member, exactly where they were an hour ago. We didn't destroy anyone. We isolated you. The same thing your empire has done to every smaller species that ever stood in your way. Except we're choosing to stop there. And you never did. Marcus's voice hardened, just slightly. You brought 400 warships to a planet that asked for nothing but to be left alone after we buried 11,000 of our own people. Stand down, General. This ends without more graves, if you let it. There was a long pause filled with static and the distant hum of the Iron Verdict's own systems. You think this changes anything? Osun finally said, his voice low and dangerous now, stripped of its earlier bravado into something colder, more personal. You think one clever trick makes you equals in this galaxy? I have lost this battle, Captain Webb. I have not lost this war. Every empire that mocked you in that assembly chamber will hear exactly what you've done here, and they will come back with everything they have, and no isolation field will save you from a fleet large enough to simply burn through it by sheer weight of numbers. His voice rose, filling with the promise of vengeance he clearly intended to keep. This is General Tarek Austin, broadcasting to every listening post, every relay, every empire that will hear this signal. Humanity has built something in the dark, and it should terrify all of us. Remember this day. Remember what they took from me without ever firing a shot. I will not rest until every empire in this galaxy understands what that means. Marcus said nothing. Beside him, Lieutenant Sethi glanced up, one hand hovering over the control that could cut the transmission before it reached beyond the fleet's isolated bubble. Let it go, Marcus said quietly. Let the whole galaxy hear it. Sethi frowned. Sir? He's declaring war on us in front of every empire listening. He's doing something better than that, Marcus said, watching the broadcast indicator continue to pulse steadily on his display, carrying Austin's furious vow outward, unedited, unfiltered, toward every corner of a galaxy that had laughed at humanity 2 days ago. He's telling every single one of them exactly what we're capable of, in his own words, with his own fear behind it. We couldn't have written a better warning ourselves. Daniel Webb finally looked up from his console, meeting his brother's eyes across the bridge, something unspoken passing between them, grief and grim satisfaction, and the quiet, aching hope that maybe, finally, no one else would have to lose what they had lost. Sir, Sethi said suddenly, urgency snapping back into her voice, we've got a problem. Ambassador Threx's private channel just opened from the station. She's trying to reach the bridge directly. Priority override. Marcus frowned. Patch her through. Threx's voice came through tight and fast, stripped of its usual composure. Captain Webb, you need to see what's happening on our end right now. Austin's broadcast reached the assembly 2 minutes ago. The council is already in emergency session, and General Austin's own faction back home is calling for something far worse than another war fleet. Define worse, Marcus said, a knot forming in his stomach. Threx's answer came low, urgent, and utterly without hesitation. They're proposing a joint strike. Every empire that mocked you at that assembly, combining their fleets into one force before humanity has time to teach anyone else what you just taught, General Austin. The bridge fell silent, the weight of her words settling over every person present, and on the main display, the isolated drifting wreck of Austin's proud 400-ship armada suddenly looked less like a victory and more like the first spark of something far larger than anyone aboard the Meridian's Edge had prepared for. Nyla Threx had spent her entire career learning how empires collapsed, and she recognized the signs the moment she stepped back into the assembly chamber 2 days later. The too loud voices, the too fast alliances, 41 governments suddenly desperate to appear strong in front of each other rather than actually think clearly about what they'd just witnessed. She was not supposed to be the one speaking. Protocol demanded a senior council member address the assembly on a matter this large. But when the High Speaker called for reports on the human incident, Threx rose from her seat before anyone could stop her, and something in her expression made even the loudest voices in the chamber fall quiet. You want to send a combined fleet against a species that isolated 400 warships without firing a single shot, she said, letting the silence stretch before continuing. Before you vote, I'd like to tell you what I actually saw, because I don't think General Austin's broadcast told you the whole truth. I don't think it could have. He didn't understand what he was looking at either. Aboard the quiet station above Earth, Admiral Elena Cho and Dr. Priya Anand watched a live feed of the assembly session in silence. Marcus Webb standing just behind them, arms crossed, jaw tight with tension. He didn't bother hiding anymore. She could destroy us with a single wrong word, Anand said quietly. One frightened sentence and every empire in that room votes for the joint fleet within the hour. She won't, Cho said, though there was no certainty in her voice, only hope, worn thin and careful. Not because she owes us anything, because she's the only person in that chamber who actually understands what the choir is for. On the screen, Threx continued, her voice steady now, carrying through the vast chamber without amplification because she didn't need it. The choir isn't a weapon built to conquer, she said. I asked them directly why they didn't simply destroy Asen's fleet when they clearly could have. Do you know what they told me? They said isolation was enough, that they don't need to kill an enemy to stop one. They only need to make sure that enemy can never again act as one coordinated force against them. Ask yourselves why a species with that capability chose restraint against 400 warships sent specifically to threaten them. She let the question hang in the air. Now ask yourselves what happens if this assembly forces their hand and proves that restraint was a mistake. A murmur rippled through the tiers, uneasy, uncertain. I have spent my career studying every major empire in this galaxy, Threx continued. Every one of us built our power the same way, through conquest, through fear, through making sure no single point of failure could ever bring us down. Humanity built something different, not a fleet that fights harder than ours. A fleet that cannot be divided, isolated, or blinded the way we tried to isolate and blind them. Every human ship, every colony, every soldier in that network shares everything, instantly, in a language none of our sensors have ever managed to fully intercept. You cannot conquer a species like that the way you conquer everyone else because there is no single command ship to destroy, no single capital to threaten into surrender. There is only the whole, acting together, or nothing at all. The High Speaker leaned forward, his earlier confidence visibly shaken. And you believe this makes them safe to leave alone? I believe, Threx said, that this makes them the single most dangerous ally or the single most catastrophic enemy any empire in this chamber will ever have the choice to make. And it is still, for now, a choice. I don't believe that will remain true forever. Later that evening, back aboard the human station, Admiral Cho requested a private audience with Threx before her return home was finalized. Dr. Anand joined them, along with Marcus Webb, standing quietly near the door the way he always seemed to when something important was being decided. You could have condemned us in there, Cho said. Every reason in the galaxy told you to. Instead, you gave them a reason to be afraid enough to leave us alone without giving them a reason to unite against us. I gave them the truth, Threx said simply. You made the mistake of assuming that truth would work against you. It didn't. It worked against every empire in that room who spent centuries assuming strength only ever looks like conquest. Anand stepped forward and handed her a small data slate, worn from years of use. There's something I'd like you to have. My final log entry from the night before the accord was signed. I think you're the only person outside our own people who might actually understand what it means. Threx read it in silence. They think our silence means we're beaten. Silence isn't weakness. Silence is the weapon. She looked up slowly. You built all of this because no one showed you mercy when you needed it most. We built it because we swore we would never be silenced again, Cho said quietly. Not because we wanted power over anyone else. We just wanted to make sure that if the galaxy ever came for us a second time, we would still be standing to answer. Threx set the data slate down carefully, as though it weighed more than its size suggested. The Council will offer you a new treaty, she said. Fairer terms this time. I intend to argue for it personally, and I believe I'll win because half that chamber is now too afraid to argue otherwise. A faint, tired smile crossed her face. But I'd like something more than a treaty, Admiral. I'd like a seat, a real one, not a courtesy position, as the first ambassador who actually understands what you are, instead of what everyone assumed you'd be. Cho studied her for a long moment, then extended her hand in the old human custom Threx had come to recognize over the last few days. Then welcome to the first real conversation this galaxy has ever had with us, Ambassador Threx. I hope it's the beginning of a much longer one. Threx returned home changed in ways she would spend years trying to fully explain to a council that had never stood where she had stood, never seen what she had seen. She delivered her report exactly as she'd promised. Measured, honest, utterly without exaggeration, because the truth alone was enough to reshape everything. The empires that had laughed in that assembly chamber 2 days before Austin's fleet sailed into the dark did not laugh again. They watched and waited and slowly, cautiously began sending envoys instead of warships toward a small, quiet system on the edge of known space, where a species that had once been mocked for owning 20 ships had proven, without spilling a single unnecessary drop of blood, that they had never truly been alone in the first place. Aboard the Meridian's edge, Marcus Webb stood beside his brother at the observation deck, watching Earth turn slowly below them, the invisible lattice of the choir still humming quietly around it, patient and ready, exactly as it had been built to be. Do you think it's over? Daniel asked softly. Marcus thought of Dr. Annan's log, of 11,000 names carved into a memorial wall neither of them had ever stopped visiting, of a galaxy that had finally, however reluctantly, begun to listen. No, he said. But for the first time since we lost everyone at New Providence, I think we're not the ones who have to be afraid of what happens next. Below them, Earth turned on, quiet and unbroken, exactly the way it was meant to.